Can you, I can't hear you. Is that okay? I'm,
Hi there, Shannon. We can hear you just fine. We'll go ahead and, no, you can you hear us?
Shoot, hold on. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Sorry about that.
Me too.
Hey, Shannon, can you hear us?
I heard you before.
How about now?
Mm-mm. How weird, because I heard you a little while ago.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah.
But there's a echo.
Right.
But now I can't hear you. So
We have to mute our side, but we can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Okay, do we know how to get rid of the echo?
No. There's a setting somewhere on here that's messing that up with the Crestron. So there's a P.
We are ready. We're on the air. Yes.
Good evening. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, October 24th. Before we get started, will you please join me in a pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you again for patience tonight. We have one item on the public hearing, but it's an important one, so let's go ahead and get started. Item A, roll call. Let the record reflect that we have 4 commissioners present, 1 absent. Commissioner Fitz is absent tonight. Item B, minutes. B1, approval of minutes of the regular Planning Commission meeting of October 10th, 2023. A motion is needed.
Make a motion. Approve minutes.
I'll second it.
We have 2 motions. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Let the record reflect 4 ayes, 1 absent. Item C, written communications. Are there any written communications tonight?
None tonight.
Thank you. Item D, oral communications. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the commission on any items not listed on the agenda? Mr. Maciel.
I think he's on, he wants to speak on the housing element.
Oh, okay. Sir, would you like to speak on the housing element?
Well, I'd just like to know how it affects my property.
Okay, so we will have a chance for you to speak. That will be when we get to item E, public hearings. Thank you. Okay, seeing there are no other oral communications, we'll move on to item E, public hearings. Item E1, public hearing to consider a recommendation to City Council for the adoption of the 2023 to 2031 housing element and safety element update of the City of Newark General.
Great, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. I'm Stephen Turner, the Community Development Director, and I'm pleased to bring this item to the commission. It is the result of many, many months of hard work, both from city staff and our consultants, but also from the community, whom we have engaged over the past 2 years to really get their input and help shape the housing element and the safety element update. So we are very excited to bring this to you, and we'll get right into the agenda. Although it's only 5 items, it's actually quite a long agenda. It's a pretty complex and very broad topics that we're going to be reviewing tonight. So we ask for your patience and the public's patience as we get through the presentation tonight. But we'll start with an overview of the general plan and the housing and safety elements. We'll then go into a deep dive into our 2023-2031 housing element. Then we'll hear an overview of our proposed update to the safety element. Then it will come back to me, and I will provide an overview of the environmental review and some last-minute housing element revisions we're asking the commission to consider. And then I'll go over next steps and recommendations. So presenting tonight, including myself, we have Paul Penninger, who's a principal with Bay Area Economics, and Christy Wang, a principal with Community Planning Collaborative. They've been our primary consultants on the housing element update. We also have Shannon Wages, principal planner with Environmental Science Associates, also known as ESA, and ESA has been instrumental in preparing the updates to the safety element. Tonight we also have Erica Gonzalez from Myers-Nave, who is our attorney for this evening and who can help us navigate any legal issues that may come up. So welcome, Erica. Nice to have you here. So just an overview of our general plan. We're going to start really big picture. I think as all commissioners and the public know, the city adopted our general plan in 2013, and it is the long-term vision of the city in a number of different aspects, which I'll go over in a moment. But it provides that long-term vision along with goals, policies, and actions that the city should be taking over the lifespan of the general plan. Really kind of sets the foundation and the direction that the city should be going over the implementation period, which is about 20 years. So it's a very long-range, forward-looking plan. It's the framework for all planning and development decisions. So whenever staff brings a staff recommendation to you, it's based upon its consistency with the general plan and specifically the policies within the general plan. It also identifies the priorities of the city, what the city should be working on over the long term in order to benefit our community. It's also the guide for the capital improvement program and helps us make decisions on what types of capital public projects we should be pursuing over the length of the general plan. So the required chapters or elements of the general plan are set in state law. State law indicates that each jurisdiction must have a general plan, and it must contain certain elements or chapters, including land use, transportation, housing, conservation and sustainability, environmental hazards, and a section on parks, recreation, and open space. So in Newark, we also have 3 optional elements. One is economic development, which kind of looks at the business climate and promoting business within the city. Community services and facilities looks at the entirety of services that we provide to the community and the facilities that help provide those services. And we also have a health and wellness element, which kind of emphasizes and promotes healthy living and safety within the community. But tonight we're going to be focusing on housing and environmental hazards, which is going to be updated to be called the safety element. So coming back to the housing element itself, it is really the plan for all of the housing that's needed in the community, for the entire community. Cities don't, of course, build housing, but we have to create the rules and policies and programs for where that housing should go and how much should be developed. As I mentioned, it includes various goals, policies, and programs. And this is the one element that is required by state law that needs to be updated every 8 years. And it needs to be approved by the state. So although the general plan is a required document from the state, the housing element is the only part of the general plan that needs state approval. And that's a critical part of adopting the update to the general plan. I passed over a particular important part of the housing element, which includes the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, also called RHNA, and that sets our housing production targets for the 8-year period. So wanted to talk a little bit about where RHNA comes from and how it gets, in a way, assigned to us. So Newark is part of the Bay Area region, and that region is sort of directed in a way by the Associated Bay Area Governments and MTC, and they get an allocation from the state for the entire Bay Area region, and it's based upon population, but also factors in people who don't require housing, like dorms, prisons, and military operations, takes into account vacancy rates and overcrowding, demolition of residential units, and also takes into account people who are overpaying for housing. And with all of that consideration, the Bay Area region received its allocation from the state of over 441,000 housing units that we need to plan for collectively within the Bay Area region. Newark's share of that 441,000 housing units is 1,874 units. And that is based upon a methodology that was discussed about 2.5 to 3 years or so ago. And as a result of that methodology, Newark was assigned this particular number. Some of the factors that came into that number was that Newark has access to high opportunity areas and also access to jobs. And so we have that number. It represents about a 70% increase over our existing RHNA, which is not too bad. It's a pretty big increase, but it's not too bad as you compare it to our neighboring jurisdictions and other jurisdictions within the Bay Area region who experienced multiple hundreds of percents increase. So, we don't in Newark have access to a lot of high quality transit like BART, for example, but we are centrally located and have access to those areas where the jobs are at. So we have a relatively modest increase of 1,874 units that we need to plan for within this next cycle. This next slide goes into a little bit more detail about how the 1,874 units are broken down by income level, because we need to provide housing for all income levels within the community. And you can see the breakdown between very low, low, moderate income, and above moderate income units. It's based upon kind of percentages, and this table also looks at Alameda County units, so the number of units that were assigned essentially or resulted from Alameda County cities, also comparing it with the Bay Area and kind of Newark's percentage distributed amongst the different income types. And you can kind of see that that distribution tracks both the county and the Bay Area in terms of percentage for each income category. So a little bit high level on the timeline. We'll go through this in detail about kind of how we got here in just a little bit. But we spent probably between late 2021 and 2022 really going out into the community and hearing what the community needed in terms of our housing in lots of different factors, which we will talk about. So we spent a lot of that time listening and then preparing the studies and analysis that resulted in the 350-page document that is in front of you for consideration tonight. A lot of the work for engaging the community and then working with our reviewers at the state began earlier this year with the preparation of a draft housing element in February of this year that was available for a 30-day public review period so that we can get comments from the public and the community about the draft element. We held a study session with the Planning Commission in late February to provide an overview of the housing element and the process. We then had a community workshop, which was held via Zoom, and that gave the public an opportunity to hear from the city and the consultants about the draft housing element, ask questions, and provide more feedback that we can then build into a revised housing element document. After all of that, we submitted the draft document to the State Housing and Community Development Department for a 90-day review. They got back to us in July with a long list of revisions that they wanted us to make. We responded to those revisions in August of this year, and just recently got a response back from HCD about additional revisions that we need to make. However, our sense is that the housing element that's in front of you that's dated October 3rd is substantially compliant with state housing element law, and we're confident that because of that, we wanted to come to the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption of that document. We'll talk about next steps near the end of the presentation about where we go from here, but there's an opportunity to continue working with HCD to make minor revisions to the housing element after adoption and before certification by the state. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in just a moment. We're then gonna pivot to the second part of the item for this evening is looking at our natural hazards element, which will be renamed the safety element. Again, it's one of those required chapters of the general plan. Like the housing element, it includes goals, policies, and actions that are meant to protect the community from unreasonable environmental risks. And you'll hear about all of those risks later on in the presentation. The natural hazards element was adopted with the general plan in 2013, and it really has been unchanged since then. But state law requires that whenever a jurisdiction is updating its housing element, that we also update the natural hazards element or the safety element at the same time, because there are how they work together is important. For example, we don't want to necessarily put housing in places where there's high environmental risks. So having that knowledge about those risks in the community helps us make better decisions about where housing could be located. So that, I think, concludes my overall kind of broad overview of kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight. The next portion will do our deep dive into the housing element itself. But before that, since this is a rather long presentation, I wanted to take a pause and see if there was any clarifying questions from the commission before we move on. Nope. Okay, seeing none, then I will introduce Christy Wang, who will begin the presentation on our 2023-2031 housing element.
Thank you, Stephen. Wanted to start off by saying thank you to the city. I speak on behalf of Paul and myself that it's been really a pleasure to get to work with the city. It's a pro-housing city. We feel really good about what you are already doing and what the plan is going forward. And in an extreme to get to work with this team and just really, it's been a pleasure. That's all I can say, really. They're really incredible. So Stephen's done a great job. Now, the overall context, so an overview of what's in the housing element and the little bit of the meat of the goals and the policies, and then Paul will and do a deeper dive into the actions, and then also talk about sites.
Just one moment.
I'll wait. Great.
Okay.
So community engagement, Stephen started to touch on the timeline and a lot of the work that happened in 2021 and 2022 was getting feedback from the community. That included a website which ended up hosting a community survey where we got 342 responses. The combination of community engagement efforts included both having meetings where the public was invited, but also going out into the community and meeting people where they already were. So the in-person engagement, like the public library, bingo at the senior center, the Tri-City Mobile Pantry, and then also inviting in individuals and groups for some one-on-one interviews and listening sessions. Next slide. And so, what did we hear from all that engagement? There's a lot of concern across the board about housing affordability. Housing prices, rents have gone up. People are concerned for themselves, for their children, for their neighbors, and not always feeling like the neighborhood that they live in is a neighborhood of opportunity. But people are also interested in seeing housing happen in a number of different ways. They're interested in helping to plan for climate change and really want to be able to enable themselves and their neighbors to be able to remain in the community and avoid being displaced by high costs of living. Next slide. Just to put up a few direct quotes from what we heard, a lot of empathy and concern for neighbors and people, not just sort of coming from their own point of view, but also understanding that there are people with very low incomes, people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of being homeless, who need options and wanting to be able to provide for that. Next slide. So I'm going to just give a brief overview of what's included in the housing element. Talked about community engagement. A lot of the work that went into this document is analysis, going into understanding what the existing conditions are, what the existing needs are. I'll go into a little more detail about each of these categories, but the first, say, five bullets up there are about what are the things that were going into the plan, and the housing plan and the sites inventory are, what we're putting forth as the roadmap for the future. I'm not going to go through all of these statistics, but just trying to illustrate some of the kinds of things that we looked into in terms of housing needs, looking at population, age, ethnic background, employment, looking at the number of homes in the community and what some of those housing needs are, what's the affordability levels affordability of housing, and how much people's incomes that they're having to devote to housing. Next slide. There's also a lot, I guess it's last, but there's a lot of focus on households with special needs, so including female-headed households, people who are experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities, and understanding, not just the population at large, but also the specific needs of different parts of the community. We also looked at a lot of key trends, so looking at household change over the last 20 years, how have jobs increased, and all these. Newark has done a fairly good job in terms of meeting a lot of the overall housing need, but needs to do more work on providing housing at very low and low income levels. I'll just note the last one, about 30% of the community spends more of their income on housing than we conventionally believe is appropriate. Next slide. So affirmatively furthering fair housing, that is a complicated way of saying this is a requirement from the state that the city look at how to address existing patterns of segregation and existing disparities with active and proactive more planning for more inclusive communities. So this is required by state law, and so this was a whole nother level of analysis, looking at the needs of special needs households, looking at segregation and integration within Newark, looking at how that compares with the Alameda County and the larger region, looking at access to opportunity for various communities and comparing across different subsets. And so there's a lot of focus on both improving quality of life for residents in lower income neighborhoods, and then also supporting access to higher opportunity areas. Both of those things are an important part of AFFH, as we call it. So this section also has us connect the dots between this analysis and the programs that are planned. And next slide. Also connects the analysis to the sites that are planned. Stephen, next slide. So this if you look at the circles and the triangles, that's where the sites that are either proposed for housing or sites that are zoned for housing but not in the pipeline are located. And the green and the blue are showing, the green is moderate resource and the blue is the higher resource categories. And so it's important for us to demonstrate that we are providing opportunities in all kinds of neighborhoods across Newark, and that we are not concentrating lower income housing in certain neighborhoods or higher income housing in others. So this is an important part. There are many maps and charts illustrating how we looked at this and thought about it. Next slide. So the next section of the housing element is on constraints. And I will say the primary section that we spend a lot of time internally and working with HCD is under governmental constraints, primarily because that is what the city has more control over. But it's also important to identify some of the non-governmental constraints to housing. So availability of financing, land and construction costs, interest rates, acknowledging all those elements and seeing what can the city do to facilitate changing those circumstances, recognizing what kind of environmental constraints there are in the community, and we'll hear more about that in the safety element, but this was really an effort to make the connection between what are the things that are barriers. So I'll go back to the governmental constraints column. This section outlines, the general plan, all the specific plans in this community, development standards, parking requirements, how long it takes to get a permit through the process, what are the fees and off-site requirements, all the different levels, building codes and enforcement, and what the city's processes are around that to identify where are the pinch points, what are the things that the city can do to help clear the path for housing in the future. Next slide. So coming out of all that analysis, the housing needs, the AFFH analysis, all the constraints, we want to address the goals and goals through policies and programs. So the goals, where did they come from? They came out of community engagement. They came out of workshops with this body and with the city council. It is quite comprehensive. I think Stephen has referenced comparing this to the housing at the last version of the housing element. This really covers all the bases. I would say it covers the 3 P's of protections, preservation, and production, with a focus on equity and sustainability as well. So I'll go through the goals and highlight some of the policies that are there to support them, and then I'll hand off to Paul to take us through a deep dive on the programs. So preserving and improving existing housing. One thing we did hear quite a bit was that both renters and homeowners wanted housing in their community to be in good shape and to be affordable. And so this goal and policy are meant to be in support of that. And so Paul will highlight a couple of programs that are related to that. Next slide. Facilitating the development of more homes for more people. This is a very large bucket of policies and programs. Newark has been very good at planning for above moderate housing in the last housing element period cycle. And so I think the plan is to continue to do all that, and to also look at the places that are new areas for growth. So that includes missing middle housing, so the smaller scale, between 2 and say 10 units, but probably more on the smaller side depending on the size of the site. How do you facilitate this sort of smaller scale neighborhood infill housing type? That also includes accessory dwelling units. There's a lot of focus in the element on partnerships, so partnering with nonprofits, the school district, community colleges, and other public agencies to best serve the needs of their workers and community members, and also to take advantage of some of the sites and resources that they have in place. Also doing a lot to support regional homeless housing initiatives, and overall trying to stay on track to make sure that the city meets its goals. Next slide. So reducing and removing constraints to affordable housing development. I already talked about the importance of this and the focus that HCD has put on that. And this is particularly focused on housing, deed-restricted affordable housing for lower income groups. And a lot of this is around increasing certainty, streamlining the process, making sure that the city has the right zoning and standards in place. Next slide. I think this is the 4th of the 7 goals, helping people stay in their homes and communities. Clearly something that a lot of community members are really invested in and care about. And so the policies here are around developing programs that support both tenants and homeowners, and looking for more opportunities to partner to make sure that we have sites that can support that. Next slide. Increasing access to affordable housing. This is one, I think Paul and I have been here before talking about the Affordable Housing Work Plan. And these are, I think all of these things are already in the works, and we're excited to get back to it after this housing element is approved. But continuing to generate funding for affordable housing through NOFA, Notices of Funding Availability, developing a below market rate homeownership program and down payment assistance programs, and amending the inclusionary housing ordinance to enable more on-site production of units as well. And I didn't mean to skip over surplus, looking at city-owned property as an opportunity to make sure that affordable housing is considered when looking at surplus, what next steps are for surplus properties. Next step. Enhance quality life and equity and environmental justice. This is around enhancing quality of life, both sort of building quality, making sure that the housing stock is energy efficient and water efficient and comfortable for people, making sure we're not building in places at high risk of flooding, and improving our ability for residents to get around without having to get into a car. Next slide. And the last goal is to further fair housing throughout the city, and just a number of policies to help support that. How do we support tenants and renters? How do we make sure that affordable housing programs are reaching the population that most needs it, and improving education and awareness of various supports that are in the community to make sure that people who need fair housing support have access to that as well. Sorry, stumbling over my words. And I think that's the last of the 7 goals, and so I will hand off to Paul to share more about the programs that will support the implementation of those policies.
I get to do the fun part. Oh, thank you, Christy. So we've just gone through the goals and the policies, which is really a kind of comprehensive vision directing Newark's housing strategy over the next planning period, which goes through 2031. Where the rubber hits the road is in terms of programs and then the sites inventory, and those are the things that I'm going to talk about now. Now, obviously, there are over 30 policies and many more programs, so we can't go through every single program this evening, but we wanted to highlight a few of the programs that we think are especially innovative or maybe different from what has been tried in the past in Newark. We're going to start with preservation. And one of the things that we heard really strongly in our community outreach throughout this process is that people really love Newark. People love living here. They care about their community and they want to stay. And so 2 programs that we have in this housing element to help improve the quality of housing and to preserve housing opportunities for existing residents. Our first program, H11, which is to facilitate place-based revitalization by standing up a housing rehabilitation and repair program or programs for existing homeowners and also residential landlords, particularly focusing on lower income households and households that might have difficulty paying for those very costly repairs that they often need to stay in their homes. So it's helping people stay in their homes, basically, by creating a program that will create opportunities for rehabilitation and repair. Another program in this category of preservation is to develop a citywide rental inspection program to maintain high-quality housing throughout the city. And this is focused on making sure that existing rental properties are maintained at a really high quality level and that existing renter households have access to high quality housing on an ongoing basis. So these are 2 new programs really focused on maintaining the quality of housing in Newark and on preserving existing housing opportunities. Next slide, please. Another set of programs that we wanted to highlight are in the category of kind of creating more housing for more people and focusing in particular on what we're calling missing middle housing types. This is everything from duplexes to quadplexes to accessory dwelling units or second units, really encouraging a mix of different types of housing on existing residential lots and expanding the range of housing options that are available in the community by making it possible for homeowners and for small-scale developers to build missing middle housing. And some of this programs, H21 and H28, which are about middle housing types, are really driven by state law. They're both driven by what we've heard from folks in the community, but also they're meant to comply with 2 new state laws which were passed a couple of years ago, SB 9 and SB 10, which require jurisdictions to allow things like urban lot splits and the development of duplexes on existing residential lots. So that if you're a homeowner and you have a residential property and you want to create a duplex, that the city has objective standards in place to help facilitate that. So programs H21 and H28 here are really about that, about making it possible for homeowners and small-scale property owners to develop on their existing residential lots. Program H22 is about to support additional accessory dwelling unit production. Now, we know because we've looked at your data that there's been a trend towards more ADU unit applications coming into the city over the past couple of years. I think 30 applications in the last full year, so which is an uptick from previous years. And so there is a lot of interest from homeowners in building second units for extended families or as a way to make some additional income. For a lot of reasons, it's a way to kind of diversify the housing stock. Program H22 is creating additional tools, including possibly funding tools to support accessory dwelling units. Next slide, please. Another category that we really heard about is, and Christy touched on this earlier, is people are very concerned about special needs households, by which we mean households that are extremely low income, that may be experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, people with disabilities, both physical and developmental disabilities, the elderly, and veterans. So these programs are just a sample of some of the programs that are in the housing element that are meant to address those needs. Program H25 is about developing a comprehensive local response to supporting people experiencing homelessness. Now, I have to say that while we've been in the course of updating this housing element, the city has already done a lot through the Cedar Creek Apartments and the Project Home Key project to help folks experiencing homelessness and transitioning from homelessness. So I think Newark is already very engaged in this, but this program is about really creating a comprehensive strategy. Program H210 is supporting the development of single room occupancy units, or SROs, and this is something that we're doing in part in response to comments that we've gotten from the state about their desire to see more programs that help to facilitate SRO units if there's interest in the development community in building that type of housing. And then finally, program H47 is about identifying housing opportunities for people with developmental disabilities. Some of you may remember that in a former era, people with severe developmental disabilities would often be housed in residential campuses like the Agnews campus in Santa Clara County, for example. The current theory is that people with profound developmental disabilities tend to thrive better if they're in community placements, if they're in homes that are interspersed in the community. And there are indeed nonprofit development organizations that are specifically dedicated to building housing, say 4 beds, 8 beds at a time for people with severe developmental disabilities. And there's a funding stream through the Lanterman Act, which actually helps to support that type of housing. So program H47 is about the city supporting the development of that type of housing mixed into existing neighborhoods for people with severe developmental disabilities so that they don't go off to a separate residential campus far away, but they're actually mixed in the community where they come from. Next slide, please. So we've already talked about the dreaded topic of governmental constraints, which is, as Christy said, where we have been spending a lot of our time as consultants and staff over the past many months updating the housing element. This is an area where a lot of new programs have been created as part of the housing element to address types of government constraints, including things like permit procedures, developing objective design standards so that if you're a residential property owner or a developer, you know exactly what the city's objective standards are when you come in for a proposal to build a single family home or a multifamily rental property or condo complex. Assessing and updating the city's impact fees to make sure that the fees are comparable to neighboring jurisdictions and that they don't impose a constraint on development. Adjusting zoning to allow mixed uses, commercial and residential, in existing commercial zones. And then finally, and probably most significantly in terms of the change that this represents for Newark, is a comprehensive update of the city's parking standards to reduce requirements for covered parking in new multifamily residential developments throughout the city, and particularly in conjunction with things like car sharing, bicycle and pedestrian and multimodal investments and things of that nature to reduce the cost and the constraint on development of adding structured parking to new developments, but also to help facilitate different ways of getting around. So programs H31 through H35 and other programs in the government constraint section are an area where we've spent a lot of time and carefully crafting programs that are consistent with the city's values while also meeting HGT requirements. Next slide, please. A really exciting area to explore going forward, and something that we've been working on in a variety of ways since the beginning of the Affordable Housing Work Plan, is thinking about ways that the city can partner with other public sector agencies like the Newark Unified School District, but also some that we haven't even talked about, like public utilities, other types of public agencies that may have land and that also have housing needs or workforce housing needs. So these programs are about partnerships with other public agencies to help develop affordable housing and workforce housing on publicly owned land in the city of Newark. And this is one of the main ways that cities can actually help to build housing, is by controlling the land or partnering with another public sector agency that has land assets, and that using that as leverage to create tailored affordable and workforce housing. So these are really great programs that we're excited to have in this housing element that we think are going to make a big difference. Next slide, please. All right. Another category of programs, and this does relate a bit to what I talked about earlier in terms of preservation, but slightly different emphasis, are programs around anti-displacement and tenant support. So this is, once again, looking for programs that can help existing residents in Newark to maintain a place in the community, to find decent, affordable housing of all types that meet their families' needs. So program H41 is to develop an anti-displacement program for the Old Town Newark specific plan area. So we got a lot of feedback from our community engagement process, particularly from residents of the Old Town area, that they were concerned that changes in the Old Town area was leading to the displacement of longtime residents, and wanting the city to look at that, to figure out if there are strategies, particularly housing strategies, that can be put in place to help those residents stay in Old Town, because once again, people want to stay here. They want to maintain a place in the community. Program H43 is about developing a just cause eviction ordinance. So that's making it more difficult for residential landlords to evict longtime renter households for a variety of reasons. Program H45 is connecting residents to existing shared housing programs. So shared housing is another tool that jurisdictions across the state of California are looking at. It's, if you have, people who are, you may have seen this in the press, but senior households where you have a single senior who's living in a 3 or 4 bedroom home and may need help with monthly expenses, may elect to, rent out a room to a college student or to somebody else who has housing needs and wants to kind of reduce their monthly housing expenses. But basically, it's looking for ways to help to connect residents with other residents, to share housing resources, to make it more affordable for them. So this is something that a lot of communities with aging populations are looking at in particular, and we think is a really exciting potential program for Newark. And then finally in this category is program H46, which is about supporting tenant stability through minimum lease terms and relocation assistance. So this is another program kind of related to program H43 that provides additional assistance and support for long-term renters who want to maintain a place in Newark. Next slide, please. All right. Program H52 is about ensuring an adequate supply of housing through various programs. And I have to say that these are already things that the city of Newark, to a large extent, is doing. They're providing a percentage of affordable units to mitigate the effects of new development. So right now, what happens is the developers pay into an affordable housing fund, but the city council's direction, and I think that's been echoed by this body, is that wherever possible, on-site performance is preferred. And so this is part of the Affordable Housing Work Plan as well, is to look at having a mandatory inclusionary housing policy that sets aside a certain number of units as part of new development as affordable at various levels of income. The city has a density bonus law, or rather the city complies with state density bonus law already. This is another way to provide, to make it more feasible for developers to develop affordable housing by providing density bonuses when they include affordable housing. And then finally, affordable housing fee program. So there is already a fee that commercial and residential developers pay when they develop in Newark that goes into a bucket of money that the city uses to support affordable housing production. So these are just some of the ways, not all of them, but some of the ways that the city is already supporting affordable housing development and will continue to support affordable housing development in the future. So final program I'm going to talk about, and one that we have already talked about in the context of the Affordable Housing Work Plan, is developing a below market rate home ownership program and down payment assistance program with a focus on first-time home buyers and households of color that often have low home ownership rates. So we understand, and we've had direction from the council and from I believe from the Planning Commission in the past, that having a program focused on first-time home buyers is something that's really important in Newark. And so creating that and creating a stable funding source for it going forward is an objective that's really important as part of this housing element. All right, so you've already seen this map. I'm going to talk about sites. So the other area beyond programs where the rubber really hits the road is in terms of the sites that the city is identifying that can accommodate housing at a variety of different densities throughout the city of Newark during the planning period. And this map shows planned and proposed sites that are zoned for housing, and shows them in relation to, in particular, the Newark's various area plans. So for this housing element cycle, beyond the missing middle and the ADU units and the preservation programs, most of the sites that have been designated as being appropriate for, say, multifamily residential development during the planning period are in one of three major areas. They're either in the New Park Place specific plan area, or the Old Town area, or the adjacent area around Thornton Avenue, or they're in the Bayside Newark area. So they're already within the three specific plan areas, and already driven by policies and programs and a strategic vision that's been put in place through these area plans and adopted by the city previously. So we're very much leveraging what's already been done in Newark in the past around a vision for how these different sub-areas could develop, and trying to make the sites that we've selected consistent with that vision. So a lot of the sites in central Newark and the New Park Place area and Bayside Newark, you'll see are familiar for those of you who are around in the fifth cycle housing element. I'm looking towards you, Commissioner Becker. You may remember some of these sites previously. We're bringing them back into this housing element cycle and putting in place programs to help facilitate their development. All right, I'm going to talk just about a couple of representative sites. So if you look into the housing element, there's an appendix called Appendix C, which has a profile for 24, how many sites? 31 sites? 20. Okay, a lot. A lot of sites where we've done detailed profiles, including development yield and capacity analyses for the sites. And I'm just going to mention a couple of them as just kind of representative examples of the types of sites that we have in this. The first is the Easy 8 Motel site, which is, there's an existing hotel on this site. The owner of the hotel may elect to continue to operate the hotel, but the zoning for the site is residential high density. So it's already been contemplated by the city that at some point in the future, this could be an appropriate site for a high density residential project. So that's zoning that's already in place, that's consistent with the general plan land use designation, that's part of a long-term vision. This would allow high density residential development on this 2.24 acre site with a maximum allowable density of up to 60 dwelling units to the acre. Next slide, please. an example of a site that's where there's not an existing use that we think also would be potentially a great site for housing that we've identified in the housing element is this vacant lot on Sycamore, which is also zoned residential high density. So once again, we're not proposing a rezoning of this site. We're simply reflecting the existing zoning, that this is already zoned at this, with this zoning designation and at this density. This is a 1.81 acre site, and it would be developable up to 60 units per acre. So what's important about both of these sites, and this is something we should probably have said earlier in the presentation, is that when HCD, when the state is looking at sites that could be suitable for accommodating affordable housing during the planning period, one of the key things they look at is whether or not the sites can be developed at a minimum density of 30 dwelling units to the acre or greater. And why do they look at this? It's because most affordable housing is built through a combination of subsidies, private and public subsidies, with low-income housing tax credits. And it's considered optimal in terms of financial feasibility for a LIHTC or a low-income housing tax credit development to have at least 50 units. So they require a certain minimum density in order to be kind of financially feasible. So HCD allows jurisdictions to kind of use these default densities as an indication that a site could be suitable for lower income housing during the planning period. Now, that doesn't mean that a market rate developer isn't going to come and acquire this site and build non-affordable housing. That could still happen. As Stephen said before, you know, the city can plan for and set the context for development to remove constraints, create programs, but ultimately it's developers and their investors who are building new housing. What this, including this site and the housing element, shows is that the city has created the opportunity for allowing the development of affordable housing on these kinds of sites at the required density with programs and policies that facilitate development. So with that, I'm going to stop there, and I believe we're going to go on to the exciting safety elements next.
That's right. And certainly, before we move on to Shannon Wages with ESA, wanted to see if the Planning Commission had any comments about the housing element portion of the presentation.
Any questions or comments?
No, I had one, but he answered it in his talk, so.
Commissioner Becker?
Is it all right if I save it till the end?
Sure. Absolutely. Okay, very good. I think with this, we will move on to the safety element. Again, one of the required elements of the general plan, and at this point in the life cycle of the general plan and the housing element, it needs an update per state law. And so we've been going on a concurrent process with the update of the housing element to also update our natural hazards element, which will be renamed safety, the safety element. So with that, we're going to cross our fingers and attempt to have Shannon Wages make her presentation. I don't think that you will be able to see her, but you should, you will be able to see the slides and hear her audio presentation at the, I think at the very least. Shannon, can you hear us and can we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's working out very well. You have the floor.
Great, thank you. Is there a way to, okay, good. I can see the presentation. All right, so under California state law, each jurisdiction is required to have a safety element that protects the community from any unreasonable environmental risks. State law also dictates that the safety element must be updated concurrently with the housing element, and each safety element must include goals, policies, and actions to address each hazard and increase the community's resilience to climate impacts. As of 2019, there are also a few new requirements related to evacuation planning and safety elements. So the first being SB 99, which requires the identification of any residential developments with less than 2 evacuation routes within the city. And the second one is Assembly Bill 747, which requires the identification of evacuation routes and their capacity, safety, and viability under a range of emergency scenarios. And Fair and Peers performed both of those analyses for the safety element. It's attached as an Appendix B, I believe, to the safety element. And in a later slide, I'll discuss how the updated safety element satisfies both of these new statutes. All right, next slide. Okay. Is that the next slide? Just want to make sure we're...
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the safety element is one chapter within the city's guiding general plan, and it identifies safety issues and related needs which are anticipated to be of ongoing concern to the people of Newark. This update specifically is intended to ensure the city takes action to reduce natural and man-made hazards and safety threats and responds quickly to public safety incidents. I'd also like to highlight that in the 2013 general plan, the element was previously called the environmental hazards element, but it is now simply called the safety element. So this slide shows an overview of our process for updating the safety element. So we began by reviewing relevant plans, which I'll go over. We moved on to analyze existing conditions related to each hazard within the city. And then we coupled our research with a community survey. I should say augmented our research with a community survey to identify community needs and concerns, and used all of the collected research and community feedback to draft the updated safety element. We weren't able to fit all the relevant policy and planning documents here, but this is just a limited list of some of the plans we reviewed in the preparation of developing the updated safety element. So, of course, the 2013 element, the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan, which I believe now is also currently underway and being updated, the Alameda County local hazard mitigation plan, and the climate action plan initial framework and emergency operation plan. Those are some key documents that informed our analyses. We performed an existing conditions analysis, as I said, on each of the topics related to Newark, and here you can see each of those topics. The orange indicates these are new topics to be updated to the updated element. They were not included in the 2013 environmental hazards element or anywhere in the general plan. But actually, that's not true. Actually, I'm going to go through each one of these, and some of them were in the other elements of the general plan. And then the existing conditions analysis also informed our development of the existing conditions report, which is attached to the safety element as Appendix A, and a summary of the existing conditions analysis pertaining to each hazard topic is also included in the safety element, sort of as a background to the goals, policies, and actions. So to solicit community feedback related to the safety elements and hazards of concern within the community, we distributed a community survey via SurveyMonkey, and we used the feedback, as I mentioned, from that survey to sort of ground truth, first of all, the existing conditions, and then develop goals, policies, and actions to reflect community needs and issues. All right, so I'm going to go through, as I mentioned, we analyzed information gathered from relevant plans. We prepared the existing conditions analysis and the survey, and all of these kind of were combined to develop the goals and policies. And so now I'm going to go through each one of these topics, each hazard topic, and just kind of highlight some of our key findings and the policies, just a sample of the policies that respond to these key findings. So you want to go to the next slide, or you can go ahead to the next one as well. All right, so starting with air quality. This was a topic of the 2013 general plan, but it was included in the health and wellness element. In our existing conditions analysis, we found that there are disproportionately high rates of asthma in the city, especially near Interstate 880 and State Route 84. These conditions are influenced, of course, by the presence of diesel particulate matter and PM 2.5, which we have included a figure of here. And in response to these findings, some of the policies related to this topic include guidelines for implementing the forthcoming climate action plan, which is, of course, is going to be focused on greenhouse gas reduction and air quality. So that's going to be a very important plan to address air quality concerns in the city, as well as guidelines for land use planning to promote improved air quality. So things like buffering away from freeways and other uses that could impact people's health, and allowing for a mix of uses, as was discussed in the housing element, to facilitate more walking and less driving between uses locally. All right, so those are just a couple of examples. Next slide. So the drought and water quality was a topic. These topics were in the 2013 general plan, but included in the conservation and sustainability element. And our existing conditions analysis found that surface water and groundwater in the city is primarily polluted from urban runoff, including runoff from hazardous sites. Water pollution is also impacted in the city by saltwater intrusion from hazardous material leakages. Here we've also included this map of groundwater threats in the city, which appears in the updated safety element. Some of the policies to address these findings include guidelines for addressing and preventing water pollution and investing in long-term water security for future residents and businesses within the city. And it's important to note that the state of California is also making great strides in building momentum around protecting our groundwater resources and helping local jurisdictions protect their resources as well. Okay, so flooding, moving on to this topic, this was discussed in the 2013 general plan under the environmental hazards element, so also in the safety element. In our existing conditions analysis, we show that the southwestern and southern areas of the city are within the 100-year flood zone. Additionally, there are also smaller areas throughout the city, including residential neighborhoods that are within the 500-year flood zone. In response to this, we've included specific policies with guidance for mitigating the impacts of flood hazards on community members and policies to invest in physical infrastructure such that it can withstand the impacts of floods. And we can go into more detail on policies in the Q&A. Okay, so hazardous materials was also a topic in the 2013 environmental hazards element. The existing conditions report highlights that in the city, there are a sizable number of industrial uses that involve hazardous materials. Additionally, the rail and freeway network in and near the city are often used to transport hazardous materials. Of course, these have various impacts on the community. As I mentioned, groundwater, also air quality impacts. In response to these findings, policies under this topic aim to protect both new and existing developments from the harms associated with proximity to hazardous uses and materials. And last but not least, the topic of emergency preparedness is also covered in the 2013 environmental hazard element. Since the city is vulnerable to hazards, including earthquakes and floods, drought, and hazardous materials incidents, of course, emergency preparedness is essential to promoting safety within the city, and policies to support preparedness include requirements for informing community members of available resources to prepare for emergencies, as well as guidance on evacuation planning and evacuation notifications. And on that topic, the SB 99 and AB 747 analyses are also under the emergency preparedness section of the safety element to satisfy these requirements. We mapped residential parcels with only one point of access, and in our analysis we found that there are many residential areas with cul-de-sacs where parcels are limited by only one access route. Additionally, related to SB 747, we had an analysis completed of multiple evacuation scenarios, focusing on the availability of roadways during various modeled flood emergencies, the flooding being of the most likely scenario where mass evacuation would take place. And this analysis found that various topographical features, such as the San Francisco Bay, limit the direction and number of evacuation routes available during an emergency scenario. And as I mentioned, a complete analysis of these points related to evacuation planning can be found in Appendix B of the safety element. So that's just sort of a highlight. Obviously, there's a lot more we could go into on the safety element, but that concludes my presentation, and I have the element pulled up, the existing conditions report, and the evacuation planning analyses. So for any questions that come up, I can certainly go into more detail on any of these policies and related subjects. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Before we move on to the next section, just wanted to check in with the Planning Commission to see if you have any questions for our consultant regarding this chapter.
Questions or comments? Let's go for it.
Well, we're in the concluding portion of our presentation, so we're in the home stretch here. I want to finish up by talking about our environmental review for all the information you've just heard, talk about some revisions that we would like to make to the housing element before sending our next version to the state for review. So I'll go over those. I'll provide the staff recommendation and next steps. So for updating the housing element and the safety element, that this does qualify as a project under the California Environmental Quality Act. And staff went through a process with ESA, the same consultant that performed the safety analysis, to do an analysis of the changes to the general plan regarding safety and housing, and compare that with the overall Newark General Plan tune-up environmental impact report, which was prepared in 2013, along with the general plan itself. So we compared the changes to housing and safety element and compared them to the existing environmental impact report. We found that no subsequent environmental impact report was required to be prepared because there's really no substantial changes that have been proposed or the conditions that require major revisions of the general plan tune-up EIR. That means that, for instance, we're not changing any of the zoning in the housing element, like we're not changing things from industrial to residential or commercial to residential. We're consistent with what the general plan saw with regards to land uses throughout the city, and we're not changing them. Similarly, in the safety element, we are updating the existing conditions reports and adding new policies and programs to address those. But overall, there's really been no substantial change in the conditions that would require a new EIR for the proposed actions tonight. And then concluding that the housing element and safety element are subject to all of the previously adopted mitigation measures from the 2013 EIR. So that is our comment on CEQA, and I will move now into revisions to the housing element that we would like to send to the state before the end of this month. As we mentioned, we've had a back and forth process with our state reviewers on various revisions on the housing element. Most recently, we had sent a version in mid-August. They took 60 days to review it, and just last week we got a comment letter back, which is a lot shorter than the comment letter that we received back in July, but they still are asking us to make further revisions to the housing element so that they can essentially certify the document. It's our opinion that our housing element that's in front of you is consistent with state law, but we are not the ones that can self-certify our housing element at this point. So we still need the state's cooperation in that. And so there's still a lot of back and forth. So we are proposing changes that don't appear in your version tonight, but we'll ask the Planning Commission to recommend that the City Council adopt these or include these revisions as part of their recommendation to adopt the housing element. These revisions are summarized in a desk memo that's been put at your places. There's available copies of that memo for the public in attendance tonight. This similar memo will be forwarded to the City Council. So I will just go over very briefly a summary of those changes. Specifically, these are adjustments to proposed programs, including Program H2.2, dealing with accessory dwelling units. That's been updated to include a timeline for compliance, whereby the city would adopt revisions to our ordinances to comply with state law, and we would do that next year. Second, for Program H2.3, the Four Corners, we've included additional language and commitments for this next 8-year planning effort. Part of HCD's review is focused on the distribution of affordable housing throughout the community. And as you saw in an earlier slide, there's not a lot of affordable housing that we have identified as housing opportunity sites in the northern part of the city. HCD is okay with that. However, they want us to adopt policies and programs that would allow the development of different types of housing, more ADUs, more missing middle, which is duplex, triplex, fourplexes on existing lots in the northern part of the city, but also take a look at the Four Corners commercial area as an opportunity to provide housing. I think that we're all familiar with that particular shopping area. It's very successful. It's the kind of the most important sort of commercial neighborhood kind of anchor, but we also know that there's a number of underutilized spaces within that area. It's also adjacent to what will be an upgraded Ardenwood transit station. That station now serves Dumbarton Rail as well as AC Transit buses, but in the future it's expected that the Capitol Corridor will now stop at Ardenwood as it makes its way to Santa Clara and to San Jose. So that Ardenwood station will become a more important station and an opportunity for people to live close to it, both on the Fremont side and on the Newark side. And those opportunities exist in the Four Corners area. And so, although the state is not forcing us to say, turn some of that commercial into housing as part of your housing element, they do want us to make a commitment to review the Four Corners area. And there is a Four Corners area plan right now that we can open up again and review with the community to see how appropriate it is to put housing there. But the state wanted us to have a numerical commitment. And so we have placed a numerical commitment of 360 housing units. Again, not building them, but having the right policies and programs and requirements in place so that if a property owner wants to build, that they could do so at the densities that are appropriate for that site. This is something that
Mr. Turner?
we wanted to go. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
We have one question from Mr. Becker.
Yes.
In that Four Corners area, does it encompass the old Orchard Supply building and also Mi Pueblo?
It does. Yes.
So there's a possibility under this that you could have multi-story development on those sites?
Well, we want to go through a community process to see where it's appropriate to do so.
Sure.
But I think there are opportunities both with those buildings or in the parking lots or nearby for higher density housing that's there. So through that process, which of course would be reviewed by the Planning Commission and City Council, we'll
Thank
go
you.
through that. Continuing on with revisions, program H3.5, parking standards update and studies. As you've read, the state is really seeking the city to make commitments about reducing our parking standards so that affordable or housing can be built, and by reducing barriers, providing parking at high rates it can be seen as a barrier. We had that study to be completed in 2024. We're looking to push that out to 2025 based upon staff capacity, and we know that this is going to be a very extensive study that the community will want to participate in and comment on. And so we're going to be requesting that we push that to 2025. In program 4.10, zoning ordinance amendments, they want us to look at particular definitions and processes that address special needs housing. They'd like to look at our definition for emergency shelter to be more broad, to include other types of shelters, interim interventions, navigation centers, bridge housing, the housing between a shelter and permanent housing, respite and recuperative care. Our current definition doesn't include that, and so we'll go through a process and review to see if how we can update that to be compliant with state law. The state has also questioned us on our definition of family, as there perhaps could be some barriers built into that definition about having provisions requiring shared living expenses or maintaining a single lease or rental agreement could be seen as as a barrier, perhaps. We still need to work with the state on that one. I think, believe that our definition of family does not introduce any barriers or limits to provide housing. So we'll continue to work with them on that, but we've committed to look at that. And thirdly, we are committing to look at our reasonable accommodations procedure to eliminate any perceived constraints for peoples with disabilities. The reasonable constraints procedure is a variance or a waiver type of process that a homeowner or a tenant can request of the city a variance to the site development regulations that because of some uniqueness of their property, they're unable to, say, maybe extend a bathroom closer to a property line or build into their covered parking spaces because it would reduce parking. So there's standards like that that could limit a tenant or a property owner's ability to be able to have facilities that meet their special needs. And so they can go through what's called a reasonable accommodations process to request that waiver. The state thinks that there perhaps could be some barriers in the way that we process those. So we've committed to take a look at that and remove any barriers that would be there. And then finally, we have 3 new programs that we would be including in the housing element. Program H211 about lot consolidation. We have had success in developers putting together smaller lots and creating larger lots to build more housing. And although we've demonstrated that to the state would like us to have more firm commitments to come up with an incentive program for property owners or groups of property owners to come together with a developer to merge smaller lots into one lot and create incentives so that we can create more housing on those smaller lots. The next new program is H2.12, ensuring that maximum residential densities are achievable. You know, in zoning and the general plan, one of the site development regulations is density, how many units per acre you can build on a site, and that's usually a maximum and a minimum. We also have site development regulations that apply, and the state really wants jurisdictions to show and prove that developers can build at the maximum density while still complying with all of the other site development rules. Through our experience, we have found that that is not currently a barrier for developers, that developers are able to build the projects that they think they want and need or proposing to the city. So we haven't seen that as a particular issue, but the state is really wanting us to prove again and show that if we state, for example, that a site could accommodate 60 units per acre, that the rest of our rules would allow that to happen. And so we are not making any of those changes or committing to making those changes as part of the housing element, but we will review and assess our rules and projects as they come through to see if there are barriers perhaps that we haven't been able to notice or be aware of that limit that maximum density. So we will, on an ongoing basis, assess our rules and regulations and then bring forward changes and revisions to the Planning Commission and City Council that would allow those densities to be achieved if it in fact is found to be a barrier. And then finally, new program H7.6, monitoring on an annual basis our progress towards meeting our RHNA goals. The city has to do a report each year that we send to the state that shows how we are meeting our RHNA, and we will continue to do that. Not only meeting our RHNA, meaning how many units we're building and on a yearly basis, but we also want to take a look at our policies and programs and making sure that they're still valid, and they're still helpful, and they're still achieving the goals that we want to achieve. We also will commit ourselves to working closely with the property owners of the sites that are on the housing sites inventory to assess their likelihood of redevelopment in the future. So we want to kind of get a sense about what property owners are facing that might keep them from developing their sites into housing. So we want to kind of understand that and maybe adjust our policies and programs as we go along. So that is an overview of the revisions that we would like the Planning Commission to consider, recommending to council to include within our next edition or next version of the housing element. Based upon, whatever Planning Commission's recommendation and action is tonight, this will be transmitted to the City Council for their meeting this Thursday, October 26th. So the City Council will know exactly what the Planning Commission is recommending with regards to the housing element and safety element, and we will transmit that resolution to them at that time. And then in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, we will continue to work with HCD staff to incorporate the revisions and address any remaining issues. And through that, we have regular meetings with staff, and we will likely have those through December to fine-tune the housing element for eventual HCD certification, which is expected by the end of 2023. And based upon those changes that we make, we want to come back to the Planning Commission and City Council and show what changes have been made so that it's very clear to the Commission, the Council, and the public about the sort of non-substantial changes that we will make prior to certification and let everybody know what those changes are. So with that, the staff recommendation tonight is that we recommend that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution for a general plan amendment to repeal the fifth cycle housing element for the period of 2015 to 2023 and adopt the housing element for the general plan period 2023 to 2031 and repeal the existing natural hazards element and adopt the safety element of the general plan in compliance with state housing law. In addition to that, staff is, as I mentioned, recommending incorporating the housing element revisions as described in the October 2023 memo into the next version of the housing element and submitting that to council for their consideration. So with that, that completes probably the longest presentation that staff has provided to the Planning Commission, at least in some time. And we're very appreciative of your attention, appreciative of the public's attention, and we're here to take any questions and hear from members of the public.
Okay, so before I open the public hearing, I'll bring it back to the commission for any questions or comments.
I definitely have a few comments regarding this. First of all, just thank you to staff and our consultants, just a Herculean effort in pulling this thing together. And it was a long presentation, but I think it was necessary given the amount of work and time that has been put into pulling this thing together. You know, frankly, I just, part of me just does not like the fact that HCD/the state get to have so much impact and control over local planning. I realize that our hands are tied. They pass these Senate bills, these Assembly bills, and we really don't have a choice in a lot of matters, but I just want to state for the record that I just personally do not like it. I think the city of Newark has done a great job over the years of planning for development in a very orderly manner. And in a lot of cases, these changes that are being dictated by the state, they really tie our hands. And I think, just frankly, I don't think it's good planning to have it planned from the top as opposed to knowing local conditions, local needs, local desires. So having said that, I still think the staff and consultants did an excellent job of taking those, incorporating them into the new revised general plan and safety element. And I think ultimately it's a good compromise. And as you've stated, Mr. Turner, it doesn't require us to build the housing. It just has to require us to have the opportunities and reduce constraints in development in the city. So having said that, just a couple of quick points, and then I'll move on to my fellow commissioners if they want to make some statements. I certainly support a continuation of the city's fair housing policies. I think we've done a good job over the years, and I think this will help us continue those fair housing policies. I support all the initiatives for homeless and special needs populations. I think they're long overdue. I think we all see when you don't have opportunities for the homeless population, we all see in this community what happens when you don't. So I think it's long overdue, and I'm glad to see that it's in here. I certainly support the programs that assist in the rehabilitation of older housing. I think that's something that we see in any community as the population ages. A lot of people don't have the means to keep their property up, and it causes basically housing to degenerate in communities. And I do like the opportunity. I look forward to seeing what staff will come up with to assist folks in being able to maintain their homes and stay in their homes as they age. The rental inspection programs can be something new. It'd be interesting to see, the devil's in the details, as they say. I'd like to see how that's going to be initiated, but I think it's a good thing, especially to protect tenants that a lot of times are very vulnerable to what the actual property owners will dictate. So I don't think it's a bad thing if it's done right. I also like the displacement programs. That's a nice concept. I think folks, especially during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, I think we have to protect those vulnerable populations that may be displaced unfairly. So it'd be interesting to see what's going to come out of that program when staff develops that. Now, the things I don't like, and again, my personal opinion, by right development where the city's hands are tied, I don't believe it's good planning. I don't think that because a developer decides they'll put together a certain percentage of what they consider affordable housing, that they essentially can build on sites that maybe not good places for development. I think that that's something that's going to come back and bite communities in the long run. It sounds good on the face of it, building affordable housing at a certain percentage, but ultimately if you end up with a project that the rest of the project is not good for the community, I don't think it's good for anybody. Urban lot splits, 100% against them. People have purchased homes in single-family neighborhoods. They've invested quite a bit of money, and we're going to now allow, again, because the state is requiring this, property owners to potentially split their property, build 2, 3, 4 units on their property. What's to stop speculators coming in and buying up large portions of single-family areas and then deciding to do a very large area of urban splits? That's something I think it negatively impacts neighborhoods and frankly changes the entire character, or potentially changes the characteristics of single-family neighborhoods. The parking requirements, something that's going to be, I think, controversial. The problem is, like it or not, people are driving cars still. We don't have a very good system of mass transit, frankly, especially in Newark. We don't have a BART line that runs through here. Our bus service is sporadic at best. People don't use it. Frankly, people are still driving. Whether they're driving gas cars or they're going to be driving electric cars in the future, people are going to need places to park their vehicles. And when you change those parking requirements, what happens is you're going to have spillover. So you may have a development over here that has a very low parking requirement. Those people are still going to drive cars, and they're going to park their cars somewhere else and probably in everybody else's neighborhood. Anybody that lives in either rental units or in single-family developments know that there tends to be a competition for parking spaces, and even though it's not your space, people get upset when people park in front of their homes or park too many cars and start parking on basically their properties, start parking in places they shouldn't. So I think we have to be very careful about changing our parking requirements to any lower than they already are. Anyway, despite all of our efforts, frankly, just again, my opinion, I don't think we can build our way out of this problem. I don't think we can, let me clarify that. I don't think we can build our way out of this housing problem without affecting existing populations, existing homeowners, existing renters, and so forth. I mean, I know the state thinks that we can, I just don't think we can. But having said all of that, I think the city staff and our consultants did as good of a job as they could have done, given some of the constraints that the state has put on us, and I'll certainly support this version of the housing element as we move forward. So that was not a question or a question, it was just my opinion and statement.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Becker. Any other comments or questions?
I just have a comment. I agree that the state mandating how many units you have to build every year, at some point, I mean, they think, oh, well, you're gonna be tearing down old houses and building new houses, but people stay in their houses. Especially in Newark, they really, really like their neighborhoods and their houses, and you don't have a lot of turnover. So at some point, when the state says, oh, you need this many, there's just gonna be no place to put it.
Other comments or questions? I have a couple that I'll go through, and then it looks like the public hearing will be relatively brief. But I echo Commissioner Becker's comments. The presentation, although long, was fantastic. It was really a demonstration of just how much work has went into this, and so a thank you from us in terms of getting everything done from A to Z. What stood out to me today, and I don't know if it was Mr. Penninger, Ms. Wong, but what we heard from the community, there was a slide. And a key point there from the community was residents were very concerned about affordability, and they were concerned and wanting to stay in their neighborhoods, whether it was for themselves or their family members. And one of the key themes within our housing element, the goals and policy sections, was providing affordable housing or housing for all income categories. We even had a table that showed how many units we need to provide for, again, from the state, but for low, medium, above moderate, et cetera. So again, really kind of a testament to the emphasis placed in the element in hearing back from the community. A couple of items here that stood out to me. It was a policy rather, H54, and this was the section that spoke to amending our inclusionary housing ordinance to which affordable units would be provided on site instead of developers paying an in lieu fee. And so my understanding is in this scenario, currently in the city of Newark, when there is a new housing development, developer has the option to pay a fee rather than providing the units or affordable units on site. The city will then collect those fees and at a future date, disperse them for a larger affordable housing project. Under this scenario, and everything has pros and cons, and there are without a doubt certainly some benefits to that. We're able to provide a lot of affordable housing units at once. What I do like about this specific policy is those affordable units are provided in real time. So for instance, if there is a 50-unit project, 100-unit project, whatever it may be, having this inclusionary program, the affordable units are built at the same exact time of those market rate as the market rate units, and not some future date that will happen eventually, but we still do not know at the time of approval of the project. So that was one item that stood out to me that I'm hopeful that we can amend or continue moving that ball forward after we do approve the housing element. I do have a couple of questions specific to the memo that you provided tonight. And bear with me as I kind of get to each section. The first one is specific to the four corners language, which makes sense, understanding why the change needs to occur there. My question is, there's language that states with a target of 360 units on existing commercial properties. Is this, actually there's two questions. Is this 360 unit, is it specific to one of the properties in the Four Corners area, or is this a unit allocation that we're giving for the entire Four Corners area?
It would be for the entire Four Corners area, and it may not be in all areas after we go through the public planning process for that area. Some areas may be better suited for higher density residential than others, or others may be better suited for housings at lower densities. But overall, I think for the Four Corners commercial area, being able to accommodate 360 units is a reasonable goal, but it wouldn't be necessarily at this time targeted at one site. We're looking at this at a very big picture level until we can conclude the public planning process for that area.
Understood. So our language here is, it's essentially, we're telling the state, hey, we have this on our radar for future planning. This is what we anticipate kind of from a unit allocation standpoint for this area.
Yes, it's not a commitment to build that because we are, that housing could, well, could be greater than that. It could be less. It's not included within the with the housing element as a housing opportunity site, but it's a pretty conservative number, we think, given the amount of land and the availability and opportunity for development on that site. So it's not overly aggressive, but it's not anything that is that the state will say, go back to the drawing board. It's too few units. And we think it's reasonable.
The comment there is, and understand if I believe it's the H-train line that would extend our potential station.
Yeah, the Capital Corridor.
Capital Corridor. Knowing that that's still in the planning stages, and Newark being the subject of having a specific plan in the Dumbarton TOD area, potentially having a train stop there, to not have it happen, not to say that it won't, just having that still fresh in memory to where when it does come time to evaluate the specific Four Corners area, to really have a grasp on, the likelihood of getting a station there, and the timeline behind it. You know, what needs to occur if we are going to plan for having that station. Obviously, a higher, knowing that we will have it eventually would be helpful.
For sure. And really, in a way, I think staff would see it as a prerequisite for implementing the type of residential densities that we're talking about in this plan. If the it's called the South Bay Connect project, and that is the project that is looking at realigning freight rail and passenger rail on the various subdivisions in southern Alameda County. If the decision is not to have passenger rail at Ardenwood, then there really isn't that strong then of a demand for that type of housing in that area. Now, I think that probably Four Corners can accommodate some moderate amount of housing in a mixed use. I think that achieves a number of different types of goals, but specifically looking at accommodating a rail station in Fremont at Ardenwood, and then responding with some higher density housing that would make more walkable neighborhoods and having folks being able to access public transit easily without driving. It really, that Ardenwood station is a prerequisite for those types of decisions. So we'll have to monitor that extremely carefully.
Okay. The next comment, it's more of a comment than a question, but also in the revisions in the memo provided to program H211 catalyze the development of small sites through a lot consolidation incentive program. For starters, I love this, especially knowing that we have a recently approved Old Town specific plan where we do want to incentivize redevelopment. We do have a lot of smaller lots to which, if we would like to see redevelopment, high likelihood that there would need to be some type of lot consolidation. Knowing that assemblage of sites is very challenging, I do like all of the items put forth in here. My one comment would be, if we do want to add, not that it's necessary or mandatory, but also a very good amount of neighborhood outreach to educate the various property owners of the incentives and all the reasons why it would make sense to consolidate and assemble together for a kind of a larger mixed-use development.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Lastly, my last kind of comment here, if the housing element moves forward tonight, goes to city council adopts it, and it goes to HCD, HCD comes back with comments, and you touched on this previously, what is the process? What triggers it to have to come back to commission and council, or is it something that staff and consultant can kind of just plug away at and ultimately get certified?
Certainly. Although the state has, in their October 16th letter, said that, in their opinion, our housing element does not yet comply with all state housing element laws, the changes that are necessary for it to comply are not substantial. You know, there are adjustments modifications, minor revisions, those types of things. We've heard from them that that this October 16th letter represents kind of the final list of items, and that we're not expecting any new gotchas to come up at the last minute. If so, if we got that communication, we probably wouldn't be here tonight. We would say, listen, we've got more work to do. Let's put off the Planning Commission and City Council meetings, and let's kind of go back to the drawing board. We don't have to go back to the drawing board. We can make these revisions post-adoption, and HCD is supportive of that process, especially when our implementing and adopting resolutions include having staff the authority to make those minor, non-substantial changes, but then come back to the Planning Commission and City Council within 60 days of certification to communicate to the public, council, and the Planning Commission what those changes are and find them to be acceptable.
Yeah. Which sounds like a good game plan.
I have one more question after
Please.
listening to what you said. So on the Four Corners, I know that's just, we do have this space available. Are we not pursuing businesses there now?
Oh, we absolutely are,
Oh,
for
okay.
sure.
So if
Yes.
businesses are there, it's okay. We're not like saying, oh, we're thinking.
No, we're not giving up on commercial there. I mean,
Okay.
it is such an important commercial area, really a neighborhood serving commercial area. And it's important to have those mix of uses. The community expects that. We wouldn't want to change that. Certainly, brick and mortar retail is changing and evolving. And some folks will say that portions of Newark are over-retailed, like we just have too much retail in a way to get the high-quality shops that what we need. So we've kind of started understanding through our economic development division, understanding the constraints that property owners, in a way, kind of put up on themselves through conditions, covenants, and requirements, and other restrictions that the city isn't privy to. But there's a mishmash, technical term, of property owners in that area who can't often kind of agree and see eye to eye on things, and so it's difficult. And some tenants have veto rights over new retail that comes in. So it's pretty complicated, but we're not giving up on it because we know how important that it is.
Yeah.
But we see this other kind of a potential and opportunity for a mixed use area to help us achieve a number of goals that we have set out for.
I mean, the grocery stores that we do have, like Sprouts and Safeway, I know lots of people that live in North Fremont and Union City that use these because they have a food desert there, and they said the only thing they have is the Lucky's over at Union Landing. And so we're getting a lot of those people at these two stores.
Yeah, we absolutely want to keep commercial viable in Four Corners. That's an extremely important part of the city's goals, for sure.
Okay, well, we have a public hearing to open. I will open the public hearing. Right now, I do have one speaker card, Mr. George Maciel. He did, okay, so I do not believe he's no longer present. If there's anyone else here that would like to address the commission, now would be the time to do so. Again, this is for item B1. Seeing not, we will close the public hearing. And I'll now bring it back to the commission for any further comments or questions. This is an item that would need a motion.
If there's no further questions, I'll make the motion to approve the recommendation of City Council to
I'll
adopt
second
this.
it.
Okay, let the record reflect, we have two motions. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, let the record reflect, we have 4 ayes, 1 absent, Commissioner Fitz. And this item is now moving forward to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our consultants and to staff. Again, a lot of heavy lifting there, and it was demonstrated today. Thank you very much. It was a lot of work. Item F, staff reports.
No staff reports this evening.
Okay, item G, commission matters. Report on city council actions.
Nothing to report at this time.
Okay. Bring it to the H, any planning commission comments tonight?
Thank you for making it so easy to understand and going into details and sorry that the state keeps giving you revisions, and hopefully this is the last one, and they'll be really
We hope so, too.
No further comments.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.